Hi, I'd like to welcome you all here tonight. My name is Jackie Van Eckeren. I'm chairwoman of College Republicans at Iowa State. And before we get started with the program, there's two things I'd like to announce to you. Immediately following the program this evening, there will be a reception at the Women's Center, and there will also be a sale of women's books at the same time. Tonight we have a very distinguished speaker among us. Mary Louise Smith has been honored by her Republican Party over the last several months with a variety of receptions. These events are to thank her for 20 years of service as National Committee Woman from Iowa for the Republican Party. However, her career spans over 40 years of involvement. She's been active in the Federation of Republican Women, done volunteer work as a precinct leader, and served in a variety of state and national campaigns. Mary Louise Smith has the distinction of being the first and only woman chairman of the Republican National Committee. In 1974, the party was in disarray, but Mary Louise brought it forward with the strength it now enjoys. She opened the 1976 Republican National Convention, again, another first for women. She has served on the U.S. Civil Rights Commission for President Reagan and is a dynamic spokesperson in the movement for civil rights and equality for all. I give to you a role model for many women, a dear friend, and a unique and very special individual, Mary Louise Smith.
Thank you very much. If I sound like I'm hoarse and not carrying to you very well, I apologize. I don't have a cold, but whatever it is I have, I've had it for 3 weeks, and so I do apologize a little bit for my voice tonight. I want to thank you. I thank Jackie for introducing me. And in its 11th year, Women's Week at Iowa State University is really a remarkable event, and I hope that all of you recognize that and appreciate it and understand the way it is accepted throughout the community, throughout the state. And people are looking at it as a very significant educational and cultural event. And for that reason, and in order to mingle with you and to talk with you about some things that are very dear to my heart and answer questions, I want to thank you for asking me to be here tonight. I really appreciate taking part in this with you. The theme of Women's Week, of course, as you know, is breaking barriers. Breaking barriers, to me, as I began to think about that, means either reaching out or reaching through something or reaching around something that stands in the way of progress or forward motion some way. It's an aggressive, an assertive action phrase. It means doing something. Breaking barriers surely implies change. It doesn't seem to me that you could ever break a barrier without changing something or creating something different than it was that existed before that time. So I would like to then, provoke your thinking a little bit by starting my presentation with the question, how much do we really remember about the way things were before we broke some of those barriers? In other words, let us indulge ourselves with a glance back for just a few moments to see where we've come from and where we are going. As women, we surely do remember from the pages of history that in the small town of Seneca Falls, New York, in 1848, inspired and organized by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, the first women's rights convention was held. They met there to adopt a resolution or a declaration of sentiments, which became, of course, the formal beginning of the crusade for women's suffrage. Unbelievable as that may seem to all of us now, there were actually women and men in that convention that thought the idea of women having the right to vote was so radical, so revolutionary, so outlandish, that they were loath to endorse that plank in that declaration of sentiments. And that was the beginning of the time that suffrage, of course, became a dirty word. It was 72 years from that date before women won this battle and were able to exercise their rights at the ballot box. Many believed that this would prove to be the great equalizer, that when women were able to go to the polls, that would solve all problems. But strangely enough, nothing much really changed. Some women became more modern, if you will, and chose to exercise their independence in a variety of ways. They shortened their skirts, they bobbed their hair, they smoked cigarettes, they accepted employment, they went to college in greater numbers. But generally, however, the suffragists were tired. They had fought this long and difficult battle, and they were tired, and the women's movement pretty much became dormant. During World War II, women were called upon to go to work in factories, in munitions plants, and on the assembly lines. Women were told it was their patriotic duty, and they responded magnificently. Those years saw the advent, of course, of Rosie the Riveter and Winnie the Welder. But when the men returned from France and from Germany and from the Pacific Theater, it was expected that women would return to their household tasks and again find happiness in the kitchen. If you look back in the archives of that time, you will find Ladies' Home Journals, Women's Home Companion, and the old magazines of that era that really extol the virtues of homemaking. They make it sound very glamorous, and they talk about the gratification and the rewards of housework. And I think of the song My Blue Heaven, Molly and me and Baby Makes Three and My Blue Heaven. Those were the days. It didn't work that way because the genie was out of the bottle and it could not be put back. Now, some women wanted to become homemakers again. Some were anxious to, and that's all right. That's the way it always should be, that those that wanted to should go. Then, as now, however, many women stayed in the workforce for economic reasons. In any event, there was a resurgence of interest and attention at that time to women's rights. And then in the early 1960s, Betty Friedan wrote The Feminine Mystique. And this book exploded upon women's collective consciousness and somehow identified the restlessness and the yearning that each woman thought only she was feeling. That there must be something beyond the four walls, that they were not reaching this kind of fulfillment that women were dreaming about. I remember very well when I read the book, and women were feeling some sense of guilt because they were thinking, I want to do more. And that's what Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique, did. Then, coincidental with other movements of the 60s, of course, we saw the advent of women's lib. And do you know that I can tell you right now, within a few years either way, the age and in most cases the mindset of people that even now use that phrase, women's lib. It is so connected to a certain era. Those were the years, of course, of anti-war protests, of civil rights activism. Some thought that those things helped the women's movement. Others believed that it hurt the women's movement. But there is a great deal of evidence that they drew strength from each other. These were the years that spawned the women's movement as we know it today. The word feminist, defined as a man or a woman who believes in social, political, and economic equality for women. That's it. But that word feminist became part of our vocabularies. Let me say, however, that history repeats itself, and we see a very determined effort now to discredit that term as well. During the last 2 decades, the women's movement has been subjected to criticism for being elitist, for being upper class, for excluding working mothers, for excluding homemakers, and for giving the impression that men are the enemy. Participants in the women's movement have at times been derided as radicals, revolutionaries, misfits, and much worse. There may have been mistakes during the women's movement. There may have been excesses. But this does not alter the fact that all women everywhere are benefiting from the contributions that those early feminists made by the great strides that were brought about by the more outspoken of our sisters. We have only to look around us to understand that the women's movement has made and continues to make a very great difference in this world we live in. There is a kinship between women who went through all or part of those earlier years together. Perhaps it is almost impossible for young women of high school or college age, or those just beginning their careers, to understand and relate to the emotional highs and lows of those times. The real danger, however, lies in the new generation of women who believe that they have it made, that the women's movement is passé, that vigilance and activism and support for women's rights are no longer necessary. I would remind you that freedom that we have won can also be eroded, and it can be absolutely taken away from us if we are not vigilant and if we are not careful. And particularly in this area, but in all areas, to stop struggling is to stop living. In every phase of our lives, we must learn to live confidently and comfortably with the concept of change. The women's movement, as I have outlined it to you, is simply one example of that. The changes which have taken place, the changes which are taking place, and the changes which will take place in the future. Apathy, lethargy, inattention, and a feeling of false security have no place in our lives. I find it increasingly impossible to understand how any individual, whether he or she be an educator, a politician, a homemaker, a business person, or whatever, or how a school, a city, a state, or a nation could hope to create a climate conducive to success without recognizing the dynamics of change. Change itself, the very fact that things are changing, will set most of our agenda for the future. Alvin Toffler, in his book, The Third Wave, says, a new civilization is emerging in our lives, and blind men everywhere are trying to suppress it. Pieces of this new civilization exist today. Millions already are attuning their lives to tomorrow's rhythms. Others, terrified of the future, are engaged in a desperate and futile fight to restore the dying world that gave them birth. Toffler reviews the great waves of change that the human race has undergone. The first wave, of course, the agricultural revolution, which took thousands of years to play itself out. The second wave, the rise of the industrial civilization, took a mere 300 years. And he thinks it is likely that the third wave, from which he entitles his book, that the third wave will sweep across history and complete itself in only a few decades. The emergent era has been variously described as one of greater communication, high touch, high tech, that phrase has been coined, more personalized, more efficient, and more democratic. Toffler believes the third wave civilization could, with some intelligent help from us, be the first truly humane civilization in recorded history. A few weeks ago, I spoke to a group of high school students who were completing a special course of study down at Drake. The subject of that symposium was the struggle for tomorrow. Will we create the future, or will we let it control us? That is a very significant question, because even in our everyday lives, we can see that we must come to grips with the concept of change and adapt to the astounding speed with which this change occurs. Thus, we turn now to an examination of what can be identified as the major forces reshaping the way Americans live. and which we recognize as well as the forces that will dominate society well into the next century. We are struck immediately by the dramatic changes which have occurred in a relatively short span of time. Now, in 1984, as you well know, almost no aspect of our life resembles what it was in the relatively simple days of the late 1950s. Family life has changed tremendously with the rush of women into the workforce. The tumult of the 60s crashed around us, but has given way to an older and more settled lifestyle. Minorities, aided by greater educational efforts and anti-discrimination legislation, are demanding and receiving larger roles in all elements of our society. Technological advancements, especially the computer, as you well know, have affected everyone. Medical breakthroughs are keeping us healthier and extending lifespans. On the national scene, we have witnessed the growing importance of the Sun Belt, and internationally, the changing relationships between the United States and other countries. A special report of U.S. News concludes that indelible marks of change are everywhere, and the seeds for future twists and turns are sprouting. Looking then quickly at the major forces for change, which that same report describes, and which gives us a glimpse, I hope, of where we fit into this total scheme of things. Beyond that, I would like to share some observations with you and give them some special attention to several items that fall within my particular area of interest and which I think deserve our particular attention here this evening. Number one is the lure of the Sun Belt. If you've traveled recently in the Southwest, you can see that it's like a raw new frontier, and cranes and scaffolding has become almost a permanent part of that skyline. But let me assure you that this move to the Southwest is far more than just following the sun. It's far more than living in good weather. It has far more implications than that for all of us, because it has sociological, political, and economic ramifications. There are great new concentrations of wealth, for instance. There's a political philosophy. There's a more conservative political philosophy that it takes precedence down there because I think of the culture and the traditions of that part of the country. Number two, the computer revolution. We see it all about us. Office systems, new communications networks that simply boggle my mind. I don't even begin to understand it. Little kids playing video games. It's in our kitchens. They say that the time is not far off when we won't even have to go to grocery stores or take newspapers. It's in our banks, in our stores, in where we do our retail shopping, and in hospitals. Not very long ago, I attended or helped to conduct some hearings on the West Coast in the Silicon Valley that was looking into employment opportunities for women and minorities in high-tech industries. And they were trying to outline some of the things that kept people from moving forward rapidly in those areas of employment were lack of training in computers. And they were saying that it's too late to put computers in 5th and 6th grade, that children ought to be using them when they're 3 years old. And I suppose they will move that even down. But it says something about this age that we are coming into. On the national scene, we have witnessed the growing importance of the Sun Belt and of this computer age, and it will be felt in all that we do. Number three is foreign competition. And I needn't tell you about this, how it affects our balance of trade, how it affects the establishment of United States businesses abroad, and of course the telltale impact throughout our economy. Number four change that has been identified is the declining superpower strength and the relationship that it has between countries, the far-reaching effect that it has on all of our foreign relations, upon the nuclear arms race, and the tremendous impact that it has on what must be the ultimate issue of war and peace. Number 5 is the education boom. More people going to school for longer periods of time. And regardless of where you come down on the debate that is flourishing over this subject, it has at least focused the debate on the subject of education. It has focused debate on the availability and the source of funds, on standards of excellence for teachers, on curriculum and on methods. And we must pay attention to this. It's good that the focus is there, because this is an essential part of the life of this nation as we remain in a competitive world. Number 6 are medical miracles, new drugs, improved diagnostic methods, and certainly the whole field of organ transplants, genetic research, genetic engineering, sperm banks, embryo implantations, and then with all of these things, the tremendous and overpowering moral and legal and ethical questions that they raise. 7 is a maturing society. Because of my own age, I suppose, I have a very personal interest in this item. But in addition to that, all studies here indicate as well that this phenomenon will be of major significance in reshaping the social, economic, and political landscape as well. And of course, because women live longer, this is a particularly important area for women. What has become known as the graying of America is transforming this country from a youth-oriented society into a nation where, in many respects, middle-aged and elderly people are setting the pace. For the first time in United States history, there are more people aged 65 or over in the population than there are teenagers, caused by large numbers of the baby boom generation, which we identify as those born between 1946 and 1964. Those people are moving into middle age, the stabilization or stagnation, if you will, of the birth rate, and of course the longer life expectancy. These factors will affect the workforce. They will provide more spendable income from pensions, great new markets. I don't know how many magazines, catalogs come across my desk now geared specifically to the age of maturity, or whatever they call us now. But the markets are expanding tremendously. There is more money for some people in this age bracket from annuities and from savings, which is what is creating the markets that I spoke to you about. But of course, at the lower end of the scale, it will plunge many older people, and particularly women, into poverty, which is another national problem, the feminization of poverty, which we must, of course, face. There is some potential for conflict between generations in this item, of course, because prolonged periods of responsibility, taking care of your mother, your father, your grandfather, your grandmother. Also, of course, for the tax costs of the entitlement programs, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, falling on the younger generation. Among the positive results are a drop in the crime rate. It seems that older people don't commit the crimes that the younger generation did. And of course, voter participation will grow because this age group votes most heavily of any age group. To continue with 8 and 9, then, the rise of minorities and the growing importance of women in our society. Those are 8 and 9. Both of which, as I said to you before, deserve our primary consideration. Most of our civil rights experience in this country has grown out of the oppression of blacks, beginning with the familiar early history of slavery, the Civil War, Reconstruction, the increase of blacks in the cities, and black family dissolution. But the current chapter of that epic, with all its pain and suffering, cannot help but start with the march from Selma, Alabama in 1965, which forced the Voting Rights Act of that year from conscience into law. Although the results sometimes seem to have been delayed, like a slow-burning fuse. It may be reaching the explosion point this year, fueled, of course, by the candidacy of Jesse Jackson, and resulting in a surge all across the country of black voter registration. Now, no matter whether you may have thought Jesse Jackson should have run for the presidency or whether he should not have, no matter what happens within the Democratic Party or within the current campaign or in the general election, the impact of that Jackson candidacy will be felt not only in the entire political arena, but the social and economic effects will be far-reaching as well. Theodore White, who observes and writes about the making of presidents, says, "The unlikely combination of blacks and women insists on sharpening the definition of equality, which is the fundamental faith of our nation." Any discussion on the rise of minorities, however, must not overlook the wider diversity of these groups. Americans of Spanish origin, for example, are expected to overtake blacks and become the largest minority in the next decade. Asian Americans are the fastest growing group, for instance. As indicated in my earlier remarks, even the most reluctant now can no longer ignore or deny the growing importance of women in the life of this nation. It is generally conceded that, again, as Mr. White states, any politician who ignores the ancient resentments and the new ambitions behind the thrust of the women is blind to what probably is the most formidable new force in American politics. This is, of course, most dramatically demonstrated by the nomination this year of Geraldine Ferraro as the first woman to be nominated for vice president, or is the nominee of her party. Now, whether, again, you think this is good or bad, or whether you think it will help or whether you think it will hurt, this is going to be felt throughout the entire system. Politics will never be the same again. No one should be deluded into believing that the women's movement of the past 10 years, however, is measurable just in votes. The number of women in state legislatures, for instance, has almost doubled in the last decade. And that, of course, the great news about that is a training ground, that will forecast things to come. And I hope that soon they move from those state legislatures up to the Congress of the United States and into the House and into the Senate and change the ratio that we have there. Out of 435 representatives, 21, I believe now, 2 women out of 100 in the Senate. But it is like business and in corporations. People have a tendency to move up the ladder. And this is what those women will be doing, and this is how they too will move on in and change the political picture. The dramatic increase of the numbers of women in the workforce has forced issues of major consequence. Comparable worth is one. Property rights, the feminization of poverty, which we have mentioned, Social Security, and tax reform. We have seen the speed of entry into higher education and the greater number of options open to women at every level. Can any of us have watched the Olympics this year and see the pride of achievement on the faces of those young women athletes that were performing so superbly there, and not have choked up a little? And can we then not have recognized how far they have come in the last 10 or 12 years since the passage of the Education Act of 1972? And then, can there be any doubt about why we must continue to fight for the broadest kind of interpretation, the strongest possible enforcement of Title IX? We have taken a step backward on this, but this is a concrete example of what can happen to us unless we remain vigilant. I am persuaded beyond the shadow of a doubt that greater knowledge of the history of the civil rights movement and of the women's movement would lead to greater support and greater understanding. That is one of the reasons I did this brief review at the beginning of my remarks. As women, we need to focus sharper attention on this kind of teaching wherever we go, in a room full of just a few, or in a room full with a great crowd. We need to talk about the history of the civil rights movement and of the women's movement. Wherever we have that kind of an opportunity or can exert that kind of influence, we must foster an increasing awareness that the civil rights movement did not start with Jesse Jackson or even with Martin Luther King, great and wonderful as their contributions were, but rather it's been a slow evolution of a whole large body of civil rights laws. The women's movement did not start with Betty Friedan. It didn't start with Gloria Steinem. It didn't start with Bella Abzug. The roots of both of these movements reach back, as Gloria herself pointed out, to the very beginning of our history. They have followed a pattern of peaks and valleys and plateaus, but never one of retreat. They will not go away. They will not go away until as a nation we sharpen our social consciousness and continue wholeheartedly toward the ultimate goal of the elimination of the last vestiges of discrimination. We will be judged not just by what we say, but what we do about it and how we live our own lives in relation to these issues. The 10th force reshaping America is government under fire. The lack of confidence in the institutions of government is reflected by the very fact that so many politicians actually run against the system of which they are a part. This is not new. It's not limited to either party, and it occurs at every single level. Its influence is devastating, and it simply adds to the lack of trust and the cynicism which exist currently, at least, as a result of a number of things. The Vietnam War, the Watergate scandal, which resulted in the resignation of President Nixon, congressional scandals, Abscam, and the very insensitivity, if not outright wrongdoing, of public office holders. These things have weakened not only governmental structures, but the two-party system itself, which is so closely related. Other factors, of course, are undermining the strength and effectiveness of the political parties, and these I would like to review with you just for a brief time. The rise of single-issue groups. And I include here any association, secular or religious, that promotes a narrow, specialized agenda in connection with their powerful PACs and vast fundraising networks. The mobility of our society is another one. The stability and the continuity that came to us in previous years of whole families, mothers, fathers, children, grandchildren, living in the same community. It gave us a sense of being. People put roots down that isn't true now. They're less established, and people, as they move about, are less interested or less concerned in many respects about local issues. The affluence of our society. People have had greater freedom to support causes. The causes they support are not all bad, but people are more cause-oriented, and that has taken the attention off of political parties. Modern technology with electronic polling and direct mail capabilities. Letters that are tailored to specific groups. I got a circular in the mail the other day from someplace in the East about buying a list, a mailing list, and it told you right out what it listed, the groups that they could provide you with mailing lists for in case you wanted to appeal to them. Fewer volunteers, The days of the box full of cards with people's names on it that we flip through by hand, those days are gone. It's high technology, and this has too weakened the parties. Instant communications. Television, for instance. You can see a talking head, and a man or woman can tell you what they stand for in 30 seconds, and you can go out and have a beer and come back in and catch another one. You know, we used to have to go to parks on the 4th of July and stand in front of the bandstand, or at least go to political rallies. But that isn't true anymore. That isn't true anymore. With instant communication, there's no need in many respects to know the candidates personally. And then, of course, perennially, the belief that politics is dirty, that it's controversial. Many women believe it will hurt them in their community. There are times, even still, when it's seen as not being quite the right thing for women to do, or professional men are afraid that it will hurt or damage their business some way. It just is not a good thing to be mixed up with. And finally, of course, the conviction that one person cannot make a difference is still very prevalent today. Our system may not be perfect. We talked about this in the seminar this afternoon, but it is the best we have. It's the best we have, and for over 200 years, it has given us the most stable, the most effective, the most representative government in the world. That system, however, is based on the assumption that people will participate. And if we're going to have government by the people, then people must be involved. Someone has to tend to it. It's there for serving the people of this country, but someone, if it is to be that kind of government, must take care of it. To say you're not interested in politics, or to say that you're not interested in government, is like, it's like a drowning man saying he's not interested in water. You've got it up to here. It controls everything. It controls your investments. It controls your recreation. It controls your business. It controls your whether your children are in to go to war or not. It controls whether the pothole in front of your street gets fixed. Government at some level and politics controls everything that you think or see or do. Political parties now are the vehicle through which that kind of power flows. Government won't come to a screeching halt if you're not there, taking part in the party of your choice. Sometimes it would be better, indeed, if government came to a screeching halt, but it won't. It simply goes on without you, and as I said this afternoon, it won't leave a vacuum because something rushes in to fill it. Now, whomever it is that rushes in to fill it may not think like you do, but they're going to be there. And that is what we have seen by weakening parties and many of these very powerful special groups taking over. When well-intentioned people drop out or remain silent, others simply rush in to fill that, and those results can be disastrous. Now, I'm going to share with you a very controversial belief of mine that's controversial in some areas, and that's my opinion, which I gave to the people in the seminar this afternoon also, about independent voters. I don't mind the term unenrolled or undecided or unaffiliated, but independent, no. It's a misnomer. There is nobody more dependent than an independent voter. And let me tell you why. The parties do all the work. They select the candidates. And you go in and vote. And in our system, we're talking essentially about two parties. You can vote either Democratic or you can vote Republican. And who put those people on the ballot? Those parties did. And you abdicated all of your early responsibility. You didn't help select the leadership. You didn't help write the rules. You didn't help select those men and women on the ticket. You didn't help write the platform. You didn't do anything. You just went and voted for one of two people. That's how independent you are. Now, quickly let me say that I'm not putting down independents. Both parties want them. And it's a very important segment of the vote. But think again when you register and put down I instead of putting either R or D. And this is really a plea for your real party activity. Choose the candidate of your choice or choose the party of your choice, and then be active, be supportive, not only with your emotions and with your belief and with the work that you can do, but with your money and with your resources as well. This is the thing that will restore confidence to parties and to government. Politics is a noble profession. It really and truly is. Every citizen should be at least a part-time politician. More than ever, we need to recognize that the calling to public life is one of the highest, it is one of the most important callings that our society makes. In this fast-changing world, each of us must view ourselves as an agent of change. I think we tend to minimize the responsibility that each of us bear in this respect. John McHale said it in his book, The Future of the Future. There is no future other than as we will it to be. If we conceive of a future state as desirable, we tend to orient ourselves toward it and initiate the courses of action necessary to its attainment. The future of the future is therefore what we determine it to be, both individually and collectively. Our mental blueprints are its basic action programs. The future is determined not only by what may be possible or probable in economic, technological, and socio-political terms, but also by what we ourselves deem necessary, allowable, and ultimately desirable in human terms. And John Nesbitt, the author of Megatrends, writes, "In times of great changes, the individual's power and leverage are enormous. We can either become victims of the great changes that are coming, or we can make them work for us to accomplish extraordinary things. I would remind you that we have explored outer space. We have touched the face of the moon. Combined efforts of science and technology have accomplished mind-boggling breakthroughs, and we have only just glimpsed the breathtaking and unbelievable things that lie beyond. The world is our marketplace. We speak easily now in terms of a global economy. We have the capability of feeding hungry nations and promoting peace and tolerance and understanding, and of ensuring equal opportunity and human dignity for people at home and around the world." William Faulkner, in a very remarkable and widely acclaimed commencement address delivered way back in 1953, said, "What's wrong with this world is it's not finished yet. It's not completed to the point where man can put his final signature on the job and say, it's finished. We made it, and it works. Not finished yet. Just think of that. Indeed, what an exciting concept, that the world is simply not finished yet. What a fantastic prospect that presents to both men and women who have the courage and the vision to play a central role in shaping that future. There is, of course, a very special message in all of this for women, for we know now that women will hold a position at center stage of this unending drama. As women rise eagerly to meet these new challenges, as women enrich their own lives through greater involvement, they have within their grasp also the power to bring new vitality to their families, to their churches, to their communities, and to their nation. Full partnership for women in every phase of our society. Full partnership for women is no longer a distant and obscure dream. It can be a reality if we press forward, refusing to be sidetracked by the siren song of status quo. This chorus grows louder, and it is supported by groups that have political and economic interests in no change policy. Their refrain is, we no longer need an equal rights amendment. that we've moved beyond that. I hear phrases like the feminists of old, and I hear now talk about the Renaissance women. I don't understand really what all this is about, but I know it means trouble in River City, my friends. It means, too, that our work is not finished, and it means that we have some more barriers to break and some more hurdles to clear. These are the same voices that are saying that discrimination based on the color of one's skin is almost a thing of the past. These are the same voices that talk euphemistically about a colorblind society, and they tremble at the thought of affirmative action because it may encourage the evils of reverse discrimination. In both areas, yes, we have come a very, very long way, but we are far from having reached the millennium. Susan B. Anthony gave us our rallying cry that failure is impossible, but she didn't go on to say that success is automatic. Change is challenge. That's the thing we must remember. Now, we can drift idly in the backwater, or we can use the strength and the currents of change to carry us to great and future accomplishments.